1994 Ford Taurus SHO. All modern sleepers trace their roots to this. Kind of.
The SHO is a Ford. The SHO is a Ford. Yeah.
A Ford? With a Japanese engine? I know. A Japanese engine for a Ford vehicle probably sounds like something you make in automation when you're bored and out of ideas. But it exists. In the glorious wormhole of personality-relevant nostalgia known as 1994. This car is exactly how 90s as it looks, and there's nothing wrong with that. I remember hearing about this car in the late 90s, and like the Buick Grand National, the Ford Taurus SHO, as it ages, its legend grows. So let's get right into it. The secret sauce here is its engine, the Ford Taurus SHO V6. Yamaha signed a deal with Ford to produce a compact double overhead cam V6 transverse engine. Specifically, it would draw from the Vulcan in order to be mounted transversely. When the Ford Taurus SHO V6 debuted in 1988, it was state-of-the-art, offering an iron block with aluminum heads and 24 valves, and again, double overhead cams with variable length intake runners. While the engine of these could hit 8,500 RPM, Ford put a limiter at 7,000 RPM since the accessories couldn't handle that kind of speed. Or the accessories on the engine couldn't handle a speed over 8,000 RPM. So why didn't they just kick the red line up to 7,005? I don't know. It's anybody's guess. But the long and short of it, runners, is that the SHO engine was a 3-liter, 225 horsepower shot in the arm for Ford as the 80s rolled over into the 90s. I know, there are variants of this V6. If you had a manual, and manuals exist. I didn't know that manuals existed until I saw this car for the first time. And my first question to the owner of this car when he offered it up to me through an email, I was like, did you swap it? He said, no. The first ones were manuals. Most people know the automatic version of the SHO, and the automatic version of the SHO had a stroked engine that went up to 3.2 liters to make up the difference, or rather to offset the torque converter. The Taurus SHO is the spiritual successor to the Falcon Sprint and Fairlane 500. A family car turned into a factory sleeper. While the Falcon Sprint never outran the Mustang, the first generation and second generation SHOs could outpull and out-accelerate a stock Mustang GT. The SHO's 3-liter or 3.2-liter double overhead cam, 4-valve, variable intake, Yamaha, blah, 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 cylinder has blah, 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 blah. The engine in the SHO is a technological hammer blow to the Mustang's archaic 5-liter iron block Windsor. Anyway, with the manual in this car, it has a longer throw than I expected, but that's okay because I got RPMs for days. Here's the thing. General Motors didn't have anything to compete with. The SHO was so far ahead of everybody. Ooh, General Motors had the Z34 Chevy Lumina. But that's I just want to get drunk and get me bottom shelf Bankers Club vodka car. Chrysler had the Dodge Spirit RT, which accelerated like a wasp, but there were limits to that weird temperamental turbocharged motor. But there's an issue to be had here, and that's the cost. Does a car like the Taurus SHO MTX actually justify its cost? Let me explain. The MSRP of the Taurus SHO in 1994 was $24,815. Not too bad, right? But when adjusted for inflation, that becomes $41,091 in 2017. So for a car like this, you really have to place everything into a list of pros and cons. $41,000 for a... maybe if it had a Lincoln badge, maybe, and it had a lot of accessories, but it doesn't. Who would consider a manual transmission, high-revving V6 plain Jane-looking sedan over a BMW 5 Series? That's my big question. Someone who really, really wanted an American sleeper, or who was married to the Ford brand, or who bought into the hype. Because a 5 Series, even in the 90s, is way more comfortable than this, albeit the SHO is a larger car, and it's more spacious on the inside. What American car isn't? Gas mileage is okay. 18 city, 26 highway, and it's a perfect highway cruiser. Long gears, especially for the 20-hour trip from Nova Scotia, which Dan took to be with us for this review. But going back to the interior, This didn't hold up well, did it? Switch bezels are falling off, and there's a stickiness to everything that never goes away. Use isopropyl alcohol all you want, or Armor All, because my freshly scraven scrotum I have needs. Oh, I need to trim my asshole hairs again, and farting is almost like itching, and I can do it in the midday. In the local diner and coffee shop, I pull one butt cheek to the side and it doesn't make noise. The Taurus SHO used the manual MTX4 manual transmission, which was also used in the Tempo and Topaz when they came with the worst engine, Vulcan V6. I get that they were going for the sleeper look, but maybe they would have sold more if they employed a little General Motors pizzazz to the exterior. It's hard to imagine this didn't already look dated moments after leaving the factory line. I mean, look at this badging. And this isn't even exclusive to this specific Taurus. Basically, Taurus badging on all SHO models are painted in the body color, which leads to this cheap, flimsy Tonka toy-like look. Also, the rims are directional, so they always appear to be put on incorrectly because who expects a Taurus to have directional rims? And while this is purely anecdotal, Dan has some pretty big issues with the SHO. For one, the water pump is directly above the crankshaft position sensor, so if the pump leaks, your car pretty much dies. And it's an obnoxious process to fix, if only because of all the extra steps involved. It won't necessarily ward off any gearheads, but I could imagine more casual automotive enthusiasts being annoyed at having to take out the intake manifold and tires to get in there and shim the valves and check the timing belt sensors. The whole works. The SHO also tends to have trouble staying hot on the highway, even though it runs warm while rolling around town. This wouldn't be a problem if it could run without incident in friendlier climates, but with lower temperatures, condensation ends up pooling around the spark plug wells. It's basically a hot mess waiting to happen. Dan has an enormous manual on how to fix all the problems a person might encounter with a 23-year-old Taurus, and that sort of thing is really necessary. Also, the big OBD1 book, because not OBD2, all you get is those flashing codes. Best of luck with that. And it's fast. It's modern fast, but then you have to figure out what that means. Yes, this is 225 horsepower, but in a mid-range sedan, 200 horsepower is the new 110. You expect it. You expect if you're going to be paying the equivalent of $41,000 for a upscale mid-size sedan, even if it's a factory sleeper, hell, it should at least make 200 horsepower. Nowadays, if you have a 3-liter V6 and it doesn't make 200 horsepower, you feel robbed somehow. I mean, even people make fun of the Hyundai Veloster for making under 200 horsepower, and that's a 4-cylinder with a turbo. It only makes 190. Granted, cars are heavier now, although the Taurus SHO isn't a lightweight in itself. But the Taurus SHO falls into a particular category for young automotive enthusiasts who want a car that will stay under the radar and want that enthusiast car when they can only have one car. I made this argument with the Honda Accord manual wagon. Now that's an enthusiast car that you can buy if you want to buy a fun car but your parents say no. Well, you say you want to buy a Honda Accord wagon and that's okay, fine, great, go, mothers. And the same works with a Ford Taurus SHO. Say you found a nice, low miles, albeit dated, but it has airbags, Ford Taurus. Great! My son wants a Ford Taurus. Why not? And your parents probably wouldn't know because would they even be able to see SHO here? They may not even know what it means. And if they do ask you, it says, I don't know, some sort of trim. You just shrug your shoulders and I guess that means it had leather. Oh, whatever. Odds are if you find a used SHO, you're going to find an automatic one, but don't worry, that thing is plenty quick. But it's not a cornering car. It isn't. This is a highway puller. That's what it was meant to be. It is front-wheel drive, after all, and it's a big front-wheel drive car, and there's no getting around that weight in the corners. All it does is front-end push. I suppose if you manhandle it, you could get the back to stick out, but really, it won't. Plus, you're driving a SHO. You're driving an example of automotive engineering from the early 90s. And this is one of the high points of the 90s. What the SHO does very well is merge. You have all this revs to play with and a wide power band. And manuals make everything better, don't they? And the SHO can be a daily. Dan dailies this. It's got about 180,000 miles on her, though he had to do quite a bit of maintenance. Modifications like reinforced motor mounts, solid aluminum subframe bushings, but there's something to be said for how well made the car is on a structural level. It's why the Taurus is recommended so often for people looking for that relatively low-cost daily driver that you know is going to last longer than your average Madden roster. Sure, it was pricey in the day, but what a deal it is now. And again, it's a cars and coffee killer. Find a clean one of these, and people will surround. All you gotta do is keep that fancy intake plenum all shiny, and you're a shoo-in for a lot of crowds and a lot of questions. I remember these! Yep, of course they're still making this, aren't they, today? Right, with a V8. Now how am I gonna get my hands on one of those?
The SHO is fine, it's not divine, it isn't mine, and that's alright. But this is not just an engine, so behold, cause the SHO is a, behold the SHO is a, behold the SHO's a